Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to our Outliers video series here. I'm your host, John Robb, joined by my wonderful host, Doug Lyle. Doug, how you doing?
Mighty fine. How you doing?
Good, man. What a great show. Today we have none other than international best-selling author Peter May. He's going to be talking about his latest book, The Black Lock, which is out now when you hear this interview. So, Peter, thank you so much for joining us. How you doing all the way over in the other side of the world?
Hi guys, I'm delighted to be joining you. I'm well here in France, south of France. If I turn to my right and look out there, I'm looking out onto the Mediterranean, so it's very nice here.
Poor you.
Beautiful. It's not the
Yeah.
it's the Mediterranean's not quite the black lock that you kind of put together on this island with this book, poor Catherine. But can you give us a little bit about what you got going on in this one? Like I said, I just got it. I just started reading it. I mean, you've already grabbed me here in the first 25 pages, and I just want to hear from you. Like, what was the basis of the book? Tell us a little bit.
Well, a number of years ago, I wrote 3 books set on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, known as the Lewis Trilogy. That was the Black House, the Lewis Man, and the Chessmen. And ever since I wrote those, people have been pestering me to write another one. And I keep saying there's only 3 books in a trilogy. You can't have 4. But 12 years later, I was finally convinced that I should do it, mainly because I had this story idea working away in my head that I had originally planned for another book, which I was going to write in 2020. And it was going to be set on the Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard in the Arctic Circle. And my research trip for that was all booked up, all set for May 2020. And of course, along came COVID and everything got cancelled. The book got, well, basically abandoned. But the story idea had been kind of left over from that. And although I went on to write a couple of other books in the interim, this one wouldn't leave me alone. So eventually I sat down last year and wrote it. And it's it's the main protagonist of the Lewis trilogy is he was when the trilogy opened a cop based in Edinburgh in Scotland. But he came from these remote islands off the west coast, northwest coast of Scotland. And he is sent back to investigate a crime which is very, very similar to one that he's been investigating in Edinburgh, a murder. And that book then takes us on a whole voyage through his history. And that book was very successful, and it ran on into the next 2 books. And so this character is called Finn MacLeod. He's since left the police. He's left the island. He's working in Glasgow. But his son, and this is a Gaelic name coming up, so beware, Fionla, has returned to the island. He was, in the trilogy when we last saw him, he was about 17 years old. Now he's an adult. He's 30 years old. He's a teacher on the island, and he's had an affair with a 6th form pupil. And when she turns up dead, he is accused of a murder. So Finn comes back to the island to try and prove his son's innocence, which is not as easy as you might imagine.
True that. The one thing that I always find fascinating is the settings, because whenever I read international best-selling books like this, and they're put in places that I'm not familiar with, when I get involved and I start reading this, I just start falling in love with the setting. Can you talk a little bit about in picking the settings for the books and then making them just another character?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, I regard all the settings for the books, the locations that I set them in, as being one of the main characters. Because, location very much determines mood and the atmosphere, culture, all sorts of things. In much the same way as a major character in the book does. So I never write about a place I haven't been to, and so I've set a series in China, I've set a series in France, I've set 2 or 3 books in North America, and some in my native Scotland. And this particular series is set in the Outer Hebrides. Now, these are probably the most northwesterly remnants of the European landmass. And they're very isolated, although they're part of Great Britain, the British Isles. They're culturally very, very different. And also, the geography is very, very different. These are wind blasted islands, 3,000 miles of Atlantic, the winds sweep across and hammer these islands. There are no trees growing on the islands because nothing can grow above waist height, really. But they are startlingly, stunningly beautiful. There are the most fabulous beaches and turquoise seas. And you could imagine almost that you were in the Caribbean, except for the temperature. So I mean, I chose to write about these islands because I worked there. I lived there for 5 years. I was a TV producer at the time. I was producing a long-running drama serial, which we shot entirely on location on the islands. And so I lived there 5 months a year for 5 years and got to know them very, very well and thought they would make a terrific setting for, a crime series, something a little bit different. And that so it has proved because people all over the world have flocked to the islands in their thousands, if not tens of thousands, and boosted tourism enormously.
Well, I know your fellow UK writer Anne Cleves, of course, writes about Shetland and things like that, and her same way that the setting becomes a character. And I remember that TV series. I found the Shetland Islands just breathtaking. They're just breathtakingly beautiful, but very stark. Is there any plans with your TV media experience and all that to turn these into a mini series or a TV series or something?
There have been numerous proposals over the years to do that. I even got as far as signing a contract with the BBC at one point. But I didn't like the direction they were taking it, and so I pulled out of that. To be honest, having worked in television for 17 years, I know what the processes are, and I know just how books can get mangled in the adaptation process. And I'd rather the books just stood in their own right, and rather than be badly adapted for the screen.
I think that's insightful, actually, having consulted with TV shows and stuff like that, and having been on movie sets. It is to me incredibly boring to go on a movie set because it seems like there's a lot of people standing around not doing anything, and I'm an action. I got to be doing something, And when they take
Well,
2 hours to set up a shot, it's like, can't you do this in like 5 minutes? Haven't you done this before?
this
But
is
yeah,
true, but you just imagine that you're filming in the Outer Hebrides of
oh,
Scotland, and you have
unbelievable.
all these people standing around in a force 10 gale with
Yeah,
the rain and the sleet slashing into your face. It's a whole different ballgame.
exactly.
Yeah.
You can't even keep the camera steady, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, you started writing at a very young age. Isn't
I
that
did.
correct? Yeah.
Yeah, I was 4.
My goodness.
Right. My father was an English teacher, and he and my mother taught me to read and write at a very, very basic level before I started school. And
Yep.
the first thing I did was write a story. It was about 6 pages long with about maybe 6 words a page,
Yeah.
great big scrawled crayon letters, and but there the instinct was there to write a story, and I don't know where that came from. People have always asked me why did you want to write, and I tell them quite candidly I have no idea. It must be in the DNA.
Yep.
It is. You have that need. And actually, I know that story's on your website that with your little your little drawing. And I just read a thing today that it kind of reminded me of that that James Joyce his vision became so bad that he wrote Finnegan's Wake with crayons because he couldn't
Couldn't
see pen
see.
and ink. Yeah, isn't that
Yeah,
funny?
yeah.
So it's kind of like you're a child. Here you are, 4 years old, basically writing with crayons, at least pencils. I love that. That's a great thing.
Yeah.
The one thing that I want to mention too about your writing and reading your books is you're very much a master in having characters relate to each other through dialogue more than action, more than what they do. Can you talk a little bit about like, is that like a conscious decision that when you're creating the dialogue back and forth between characters, especially, like in this book so far, that they connect more through dialogue than the actions that they do to each other?
Well, I mean, this definitely is a hangover from my TV writing days. Before, I mean, I'd written 2 or 3 books before I wrote for television. And if I look back at those old manuscripts now, I cringe when I read the dialogue in them.
Right.
I think, like many writers, before I worked in television, my dialogue wasn't very good. I mean, I think there are a lot of great writers out there whose dialogue's quite bad at times. And something I learned as a screenwriter in television was that, that's all you had to work with was the dialogue. You advance plot, develop character, all with lines of dialogue, the things that people say to one another. And I think years later, when I started trying to make a living writing books and returned to that black art, I employed what I had learned as a screenwriter in television, and I think it's in a way it's a much more direct and simple and easy way for readers to take on board information when people are talking to one another in a natural way or in a dramatic way. One of the very first things I learned when I was a very young aspiring writer and I'm reading all those how-to books, and
Yes.
one of the things I read somewhere that all stuck in my head was that drama is conflict, conflict is drama, and it's very hard to create conflict between characters without dialogue. It's very often the key to the whole process. So yes, dialogue, since I've worked in television, has become, one of the major kind of tools in my writer's box.
Well, it's that famous thing of show don't tell, as we always talk about,
Yeah.
and obviously dialogue is definitely showing. My works are very dialogue heavy, and what I have the most trouble with in writing and creating a novel is what I call stage directions. What people are doing while they're talking, what's going on.
Yeah.
What's the hard part for you?
Yeah.
If you're obviously very dialogue sensitive and you understand that. What's the hard part of telling a story on the page for you? What?
The hardest bit for me is just writing. I think what I am and what I consider myself to be is a storyteller
Yes.
rather than a writer.
Right.
And storytelling has always come quite naturally to me. Touch wood, I've never been short of an idea for a story, or how to make a story, work. And it's the first thing I do when I'm setting out to write a book, is I focus on the story and the characters. And I spend maybe 3 or 4 months developing the idea along with the characters and doing my research. And then I have a very, very concentrated period, say 7 to 10 days, where I write the story. It's a kind of very detailed scene by scene synopsis. It's the narrative of the story from first page to last. And it's maybe runs 25,000 words. And one of the reasons I do that, because I know a lot of writers do this flying by the seat of the pants thing, which I've done, and it's fun. But the problem I have always found with that is that if you haven't determined the route that you're going to take on your journey, you can get lost along the way. and you might find your way back onto the road again. But at the end of the book, you find yourself going back and doing draft 2 and draft 3 and fixing all those things that didn't quite work along the way. And I'm too lazy to do that. So in my synopsis, I deal with the story, and it's a manageable size. If something's not working, it's easy to unpick and redo. And at the end of the day, I'm happy with something that's a manageable size. And then that's my safety net. I can just, because writing is frightening, I think. And the hardest thing is, that facing that blank page at the start of a book. But if you've got your story there and your safety net, you know where you're going. It's like your map, your route map for the journey ahead. You feel confident about where you're going. Doesn't mean to say that it doesn't evolve as you go, because you might make little diversions here and there, but it allows me to then focus entirely on the writing and bringing the characters to life.
Yeah. Now, based in the UK, do you come over to the United States at all? Do you do any conferences, anything over here in the States?
I have done, yeah. I mean, I've done, I think, 5 book tours in the States.
Okay.
Since I think I did my first around about 2005. In fact, that first one, my first stop was BoucherCon at Chicago. And then I did something like 20 cities in 30 days, which was, I can tell you, a hell of a schedule. I could not do it now.
Well, and when you come over to the States and you talk with United States readers, because it's one thing that's always fascinating, like I've talked with Peter James several times about this too, is sometimes the UK and the United States, like there's many different, the readership is kind of different in what they focus on. Do you see a difference in US readers to UK readers and the questions and the things that you get and the emails you receive?
Do you know what? I mean, I don't think there's a huge difference really between readers on both sides of the Atlantic. I think there are cultural differences, which are very much reflected in the subjects that American writers choose to write about or British writers choose to write about. And in a way, those cultural things don't really translate very well. They don't cross the water that well. Excuse me, which is why I think some of the best-selling UK writers don't really sell that well in the States,
right.
And vice versa. It's cultural, I think, more than anything else. But I find, or have found anyway, when I do my tours, that readers are just people who are hungry for good stories, and I think particularly the people who would come to the events that I do, for example, are people who generally have read me at some point, and are kind of culturally attuned to the kind of things I write about. And so we have a really, really good dialogue always.
Good.
I think a lot of what you're saying is true, but I think I've sensed it kind of changing. Maybe it's because of these BritBox and BBC programs that we get over here, and I think we're starting to get attuned to more of the British flair of things. They say that we're 2 countries divided by a language, because the phrases are all different. And I think the same thing can be said about Scandinavian noir. It's starting to, obviously the girl with the dragon tattoo kind of started all that, but more and more of that's coming into the US. And so I think we're seeing a melting of those walls, if you will. And so hopefully, it will continue that way, because I really like British crime. I really like the whole UK crime scene and all that, even though you call them constables, it drives me crazy. But and the Scandinavian noir, I love that stuff. So it's and it's noir. I mean, they don't get enough sunshine, so but they're really good. So maybe that's changing. I hope so.
Well, I think those cultural things. I think television has made a big difference.
Sure.
I mean, I would say the one of the biggest cultural influences in the UK and across my lifetime has been American television. There's a huge amount of American television shown in the UK, also here in France, but to a lesser extent because of the language problem. But I mean, I take on board what you're saying about these new channels, which are now bringing some of the British television productions into the American home, and I think that probably helps break down some of those cultural barriers, and will also help book sales.
Yes, yeah. That obviously that's the hope.
Yeah. So maypeter.com is your main website, and that's where people can find out. You got a great website because I love some of the videos that you put when some of the books and some of the places that you're at, and you have trailers and things like that that people can get involved in. What kind of social media are you more using so fans can kind of connect with you? Are you more Facebook, Instagram? You know, which ones are you kind of on the most?
Well, just on the question of my website, you know, I created my own website at the very beginning, around 1996. I mean, it was right at the very beginning of the whole thing, and I bought this clunky bit of software and created this very basic website. My wife took it over, and it kind of grew over the years and grew over the years, and it's become a kind of archive. We've since put a whole new front page on it, and you know, which is more kind of up to date and everything. But you can link back to that archive, and that's petermay.co.uk, and the maypeter.com is really kind of like my blog. But the thing that I probably use most would be, I have a Facebook author page. I've got about 23,000 followers on that, and that's where I do most of my talking to readers, if you like. There's a very healthy, almost daily dialogue goes on with readers from all over the world, and I use that obviously to promote each new book, but not just for promotion, also, you know, allowing for that exchange between the writer and the reader, which I think is very important.
Yes,
Exactly. Well, Peter, we want to thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us to talk about your latest book, The Black Lock, the fourth in the trilogy. But, you know, I think it's wonderful. I can't wait to finish the whole thing, because right now you just got me intrigued that after we get off the interview, I'm like, okay, let's read some more pages before I got to go to work again. But again, thank you so much for just spending a little bit of time with us today. Wish you nothing but the best, and can't wait to see what you got coming up next. Be interesting.
Well, thank you very much. It's been great fun talking to you guys.
well, thank you. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Have a good one.
And you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.